You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Colorado. This is the Engage the Rockies podcast. I am your host, Jarvis Caldwell. So the November election is right around the corner, and ballots are going to be going out here probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, in early October. And so what we wanted to do is kind of record an update to the podcast that we did before with the El Paso County Clerk and Recorder, Steve Schleicher. And during that, if you recall, we talked about the election process a lot, and it's some of the things that he was doing to make sure our elections are safer. And one of those things that we talked about were the importance of election judges. So we thought, because the election is right around the corner, we would actually bring on some election judges and have them talk about their background and their experience and how they like being an election judge. And maybe if it's something that you've been considering, that you can find out how to do it here, and maybe you might apply for it so you can learn and see the process yourself. So our special guests today are Brenda Conrad and Candi Boyer, and they are El Paso County election judges. And I know they are very seasoned, and so that's why I asked them to come on and talk about it. And I think, this is our 40-something episode, I think 45th episode, and this is the first time we've actually had two guests on at the same time. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining us here. And so let's jump right into it. So Brenda, can you tell us how long you've been an election judge for?
I first became an election judge in November of 2017.
November of 2017.
Yeah.
So have you been an election judge for each cycle? So even the off year,
Correct.
Okay. So
Yes.
That would be 2018, 2020, 2022, and now 2024. So that's
and then
what, four election.
Yes. And also the November elections in between those, when we only have one election in the off.
That's right. The off year elections. Okay. Wow. And then Candi, how about you?
I also began in November of 2017, and I also have served in all of those elections. The off years are the coordinated elections, school board elections, those sorts of things.
Right. That's right. I wasn't even thinking about off year elections. Yeah. Great. Well, it for anyone who knows you two, it makes sense that y'all joined at the same time.
Yes.
Okay. Can you give us a kind of big picture? Like, what is an election judge? Like, what is your role, like the importance of it during just a typical election cycle? Mm-hmm. And Brenda, you could start if you'd like.
Okay. Well, an election judge can serve in many capacities. The election in this county is run in different pieces, and an election judge can choose if they like something in particular they want to do. They can ask for that. Usually the clerk and recorder's office has certain specifics, certain jobs that they're after, that they need people for, whether that's in the voting centers, because the voting centers, they usually have around 10 people at least running those centers, who have designated different jobs as well. And then once, like the ballots, once they're picked up at drop boxes, those are also election judges who pick those up and bring them back to the voting center. And then the whole process, once it's in the room, and you've opened the secure boxes, and then it starts on its way from going into what we call the Agilis machine, which is putting it into the computer system and taking a picture of the side of the ballot that the signature is on.
Right.
And then from there, that signature through the computer system will go to the signature verification team, who has their specific jobs. From there, then it goes to pre-processing, which is then where it gets opened and the ballot is then taken away from the envelope. So at that point, then you have no idea which ballot was which person's.
Right. And that's an important step because of the kind of secret ballot, right? Like you don't want people knowing who and how you voted or what you voted on, right? Like
Absolutely.
that's a big part of why they do this
Yes.
separation.
Correct.
Okay, so basically, election judges, there's a lot of different things you can do. The clerk and recorder will probably, wherever there's a need for it, right? So if you want to
Yes.
be if you want to be an election judge because you want to go and pick up the ballots from the ballot drop boxes, you
Hmm.
can request to do that. If you want to be the person doing signature verification, you can request that. So there's a lot of different roles, and I wasn't even
Yes.
thinking about the actual in-person voting centers, because
Right.
I think the mail-in, the drop-off ballots the rate of it is so high,
Yes.
that you almost sometimes forget about going in person now. And
Yeah.
I think there's 38 voting centers or something, somewhere around there, like high
Yeah.
30s or low
It's
40s.
yeah, it's either 38 to 40 for the presidential. That
Yeah,
varies with the election.
right,
There's, when it's not presidential, obviously there's less.
right.
But that's all triggered within the statutes.
Yeah, and then so just for one center, so there's 38 centers. Just for one center, you have around 10 people. So
Correct.
that alone is what, 380 election judges
Yes.
roughly, and then that's not even counting the actual processing and all that's done
Right.
at the clerk and recorder's office, right?
Yes, because then
Yeah,
once you've done pre-processing, then you have a whole set of other people in the
right.
tabulation room who actually put it through and have the votes tabulated.
Yeah. So that would put it, correct me if I'm wrong, for a big election like this, you probably are wanting anywhere around, I think 800 is what I've heard the clerk and recorder say, 800 election judges for a big election like
Hmm.
that. Is that
Correct.
correct? Yeah, that's
Yes.
correct. Okay. And right now, are you guys in need of more election judges?
It's my understanding that do not have a full slate
Okay.
of judges yet.
Okay. All right. And there is a deadline for that, right? I think it's
I
October
believe it's
1st.
October 1st,
Okay. S-
because part of that process too is each election judge goes through a background check.
Right. Okay. And so we're recording this on September 19th. It will come out on the following Monday, so the 22nd or something. So if you're listening to this and you're interested in being an election judge, you've got about a week. So make sure
Mhm.
you get on it. And that kind of brings me to my next question. And Candy, I'll ask this to you so you could jump in there. How do you become an election judge? What's the process for that?
The very first step is that you go to your respective caucus for your parties and you
Mhm.
sign up through that process to become an election judge. You indicate that that's something you're interested in. Those lists are then submitted to the clerk and recorder. They
Mhm.
comb through those lists initially and make the contacts, attempt to make the contacts.
Mhm.
And then when they run out of those lists, then they can go out and hire. And I will bring up this piece because it's important. Unaffiliateds are left out of the process in a way because they have no party to go through to submit their names as election judges. So
Mhm.
they literally have to go out and contact the clerk and recorder's office directly and get hired on in that fashion because they are used, even though they're not affiliated with a party, they
Mhm.
still are part of the process. That was something that we had hoped to address in election law. That hasn't occurred yet. But that's the process. And some of us, since we have been election judges for a while, we do kind of get asked to come back unless we
Mhm.
do something really bad. But most of the
Yeah.
time, it helps the process because they don't have to go out and search for so many people. Now, I
Right.
do want to say one thing about elections and election judges. Even
Mhm.
though the clerk and recorders are administering the processes and that sort of thing, it is really these volunteer citizen election judges who are running these elections. That's important to note,
Yeah.
because we are totally all about the process.
Yeah, yeah, and the clerk Steve Schleicher, we kind of talked about that, and I was really surprised to learn like how limited he is within his own building, within the own clerk and recorder building. Like, there's certain rooms that he can't even walk into,
Correct.
unless he's being escorted by certain people within the building. And I mean, that's important because he is an elected official, right? So,
Right.
I guess you could say that he has a vested interest. That, he's a part of a political party, and so the fact that even though he's elected to that position and he's in charge,
Mhm.
ultimately, he's actually limited. And one of the questions I think I had asked him was the results. Like, do you know the results ahead of time before they're published on election day? Like, as ballots get come in beforehand, I always thought, well, he could probably look at the tallies and see, oh, my friend is ahead, 2 weeks before election day or something. And it's completely not like that. He finds out when everybody else finds out,
Correct.
which I
Yes.
thought was very interesting. And I think it's a misconception a lot of people have, that he somehow has insight just because he is the clerk and recorder.
Right.
So, Candy, you brought up something that I think is really important to mention, for people, excuse me, who aren't aware of it. But so election judges, in a sense, they are partisan, but that's an important part of the process, right? Because
Mhm.
you have your two main parties, right? So you have the Democrats and Republicans. So your election judges are primarily either from the Republican Party or from the
Mhm.
Democrat Party. But now there's an important point that I'd like you all to expand on, which is it's never just one party handling ballots, right?
Right.
Can you kind of expand on that, Brenda, if you want to expand on it,
Sure.
how that works?
Yeah. Every piece and every part of the process is done with bipartisanship,
Mhm.
whether that's a Democrat and a Republican and an unaffiliated, Democrat and an unaffiliated, whatever. There is never just one party doing any one piece.
Right.
It is always done with bipartisanship.
Yeah. So the way that works kind of practically is like, say, signature verification or something like that. It'll never
Mhm.
be just two Republicans or two Democrats reviewing
Correct.
signatures. There will be one Republican and one Democrat. And they're
Right.
basically kind of check and balance, right? Like, they're making
Yes.
sure that the other side
Yes.
is being fair. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing with
It,
picking up
it's all
ballots.
about the fairness, the security, making sure that we as a community can
Mhm.
trust our elections, which I feel we can be because we are the community that's running the election.
Right.
And we should be able to trust each other.
Absolutely. So how much time does it take to be, like, do you need to put in to be an election judge? Because we have the ballots, the ballots go out early, right? They go out, what, three and a half weeks
October
early.
11th is when they're going out this year.
October 11th. Okay,
Yes.
October
Yes.
11th, they're going out this year. So
Mhm.
you need election judges. Obviously, when those go out, you're going to have election judges there because people are going to start dropping their ballots off and things like that. But I
Right.
imagine you have to learn the process and things beforehand, so you don't
Mhm.
just start day one on the day the ballots go out. So can you kind of give us an idea, like, how much work you put into being an election judge as far as that goes?
Well, every aspect will have its own particular training so that
Mhm.
you will know specifically what is required of you for that particular job.
Yeah.
And, that can be anywhere from half a day to a whole day, depending on the job. Um,
Mhm.
because part of this too is once the ballots drop the very next week, according to the statute, we have to go and visit all the healthcare facilities in the county.
Right.
And again, we're going out in bipartisan teams to do that.
Mhm.
Um, so that's part of that other week in there. And depending on how big the election is as to how many teams we need, and it's usually 4 people in a team. So you can vary from 20 to 24 or 28, depending on what you need.
Right.
And then, those, it's, that takes you through that whole week, because you have training on one day and then you visit facilities for the next 4 days after that. And then sometimes some people, that's all they do, so they're done.
Hmm.
Other people like us who love to do multiple jobs,
Right.
we then come back at certain times when we are asked to start doing that specific job. Usually you're about 2 to 2.5 weeks from election day when you
Hmm.
start coming in to start some of those processing jobs.
Right.
And it is all run contingent on the amount of ballots we're getting back.
Hmm.
Because you may have a day where you hardly get anything, and you either have the day off or you're only there for a couple hours.
Right.
Other days you can be there for 4, 5, 6. Election day, we're usually there for 12 at least. So,
Yeah.
some of that varies. So if you don't have a flexible schedule, that could be an issue for you.
Hmm.
That needs to be bared in mind
Right.
when you decide you want to do this.
Excellent.
Is
That's
there
good to
anything else
know.
you can add?
The judges need to be flexible because they will come and go as needed.
Hmm.
Our last election was a little bit slower on return ballots, so we didn't have as much work to do. But I strongly suspect this election will not be the case.
Yeah.
We will be working much harder this time,
Hmm.
and so yes, we're looking for longer hours to get all of those ballots processed.
Which could
Yeah.
include some of the weekends.
Right. Yeah. And uh, s- clerk and recorder Steve Schleicher had mentioned before, like they expect probably like maybe the biggest turnout ever for an
Mhm,
election, and
mhm.
so he
Right.
had already called in extra resources for it, and I think maybe using the most election judges that they've ever used for this election, because
Probably.
they expect like a very high, I think around 88% voter
Yes.
turnout, which is, I mean, pretty. I mean, that's incredibly high, like the highest ever, from my understanding.
Mhm.
And so I think, yeah, we really do need every single person that we can. Is it? I think you guys had mentioned volunteer. Is it volunteered? Is it paid? That's a question I'm just
Mhm.
not sure of.
It's a paid volunteer position,
Okay,
if that makes
yeah,
sense.
or paid volunteer. Okay,
You are paid, but you are in
uh-huh.
essence volunteering to actually do this.
Right,
But
yeah.
yes, we are paid for it. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Good. That's good to know. Um, Let me just touch on this, and we won't spend too much time on it, but I just want to get your perspective. We talked to Steve about it before, but just kind of some of the processes that you do. Have either of you ever worked on the actual ballot scanning side? Have you been an election judge for that piece of it?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you kind of walk us through that process a little bit, like when you receive them, kind of how that works, and what an
Mhm.
election judge is actually doing when they come in, when the ballots come in?
To the tabulation room, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so once it's done in the other room and it's all been processed and then it's put in trays, everything is documented. There's a chain
Hmm.
of custody every step of the way for everything. And then it'll go over to the tabulation room. There's various jobs over there. You have election judges who are strictly taking those trays and putting them in the machines to count them.
Hmm.
And then you will have adjudication judges as well, so
Right.
that when the machine pops up a ballot that had an issue, that somebody filled in two bubbles and put an X in one, well, the machine will put that over into adjudication because it's not going to determine what you did,
Right.
and what the voter's intent is. And
Right.
that's when the adjudication judges, they have a whole um, um, method that they use to determine that with, what they can follow with their guidelines according to the statutes and things like that.
Right.
There's also duplication in there for people that, there's too many markings on the ballot that they found in the pre-processing room. So that
Mm-hmm.
ballot will go over to tabulation and be duplicated. And I'm trying to remember what else. There's so much going on in that room as well.
Yeah.
And then there's several of other little pieces, and then obviously on election night, that's the room that will put out the first results, and
Right.
that will be done with the team that is called the Canvas Board.
Mm-hmm.
That is one Democrat Party member and one Republican Party member, and they are in charge of how those results get from the tabulation room. It has to be taken out of there because there is no Wi-Fi, there's no internet connections in that room at all for anything.
Yeah.
So those results then come out of that room to a machine that does have internet capabilities, and then that's uploaded into the Secretary of State's database system to put out the results to the public.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up about the no internet and Wi-Fi
Mhm.
or anything like that, because that's
Mhm.
something that Clerk Steve talked about on
Right.
here, and he talked about the steps that he took to make sure that there was no capability like putting locks over ports,
Yeah.
and there was a few other things, no remote access. So if the company who wants to work on the machine or do some kind of update to it or anything like that, they actually have to physically come there in person
Yes.
and connect to it. So there's no remote access, which I
Right.
thought was great. Anything you wanted to add, Candy?
I just wanted to back up to the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of the process because
Yeah.
I think you were looking at the scanning initially as well. When
Mm-hmm.
the ballots come in through the either through the drop boxes throughout the city and county, or they are at the VSPs, they get put into a gigantic machine called the Agilis that
Mm-hmm.
scans for signatures before the ballots are even opened. And
Okay.
that's the process that begins the whole thing. If the signatures don't match, they will get rejected
Mm-hmm.
by the machine, and then that's the process where they bring in the actual election judges who physically look at those signatures. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
couple of steps for that as well. But that's the beginning process. And once those signatures and everything are verified, because they also verify IDs,
Mm-hmm.
and if there's no ID information, then they get contacted and asked for ID, et cetera, et cetera. All of that occurs before those ballots even are opened
Right.
and
Okay.
taken out
Yeah.
of the envelope. So
Well,
that's an important piece that a lot of people don't realize occurs.
yeah. Well, thank you for bringing that up, because my next question was actually about signature verification, but I probably should have asked that first,
That's okay.
because to go in order of the process. So with the signature verification, let's say when it gets scanned through, the machine detects something's wrong. Which, if I understand correctly, when they get scanned through, there is somebody sitting there looking at them as they come through the signature side of it. I'm not sure if I'm correct about that, but let's say there's a rejection. Now you're having somebody look at it, uh,
Yes.
which is an election judge, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
and
The
then
whole process is every step of the way is with election
it's
judges.
election,
So
right?
yeah.
And then so you have an election judge from each party representing each party, and there's some kind of issue with it, and
Mhm.
they make a determination. I'm sure there's like a guideline on what to look
Yes.
for. So if, let's say, you're like, you know what, this doesn't look like the signatures that we have on file, like we can't rectify that.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a process for reaching out to that voter to
Yes.
verify that. Can you just kind of touch on that? Because I think
Yes.
that's pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
Like I said, there's a process for everything here.
Right.
Um, they will be sent a letter, and
Hmm.
which tells them that, would they have to fill out an affidavit that states that, yes, they were the person that voted. They have to sign it, and then they have to return it with a valid identification. And they're given a whole list of what is considered valid identification. And then that is called curing their ballot.
Yeah.
So once that is returned and that ballot has been cured, then it goes back into the queue and is processed, and then it's opened.
Okay, good. Okay, that's good to know. All right, ladies, last question for you. And it's something that I think people maybe have read about or just don't know enough about. Personally, I don't think I know enough about it, but I find it pretty interesting. The risk limiting audit. Again, I'm sure that's probably ran by election judges. Can you kind of give us an idea of what the risk limiting audit is?
Basically, they go through and pull out specific ballots out of each box, because when they're processed, then they kept in their trays, their boxes, and things like that. So you've kept them, and they're marked that way. So you can go back and say, okay, in tray 2003, we need to pull out ballot 36. So you have to go back through and count to get to ballot 36. Some of those, which ballots and which races they're looking at, I believe some of that's determined through the Secretary of State's office. So that they're randomly pulling out to get, you're using maybe not even 1% sometimes. Usually I think it's around 1%. And, to kind of see and pull from here to there, everywhere in between, to get that random sense that what you did was valid, what was correct. So then you have teams of two, again, that are bipartisan, who are going back through and putting in that ballot, how it was voted again. And then once you've gone through however many ballots it is for that particular election to use for the audit, then you compare it with what was done on election night and make sure that you match.
Okay. So kind of big picture is you're literally just picking a random ballot, and these are real ballots, right? And you're running it through and then verifying that the machine is reading it correctly.
Yes.
From what the actual ballot is, the physical ballot that you're looking at. But now, correct me if I'm wrong, but and maybe I was confused on this, because there is a process before you guys even ever put a single actual voter ballot in, like ahead of time. And I think election judges are part of that. I'm sure they are, where you're doing an audit on the machines ahead of time before you actually start counting any ballots for the election at all, and you run through. And I'm drawing a blank on what the actual test is called, but I know that I think representatives from the parties are there, or maybe even the candidates themselves. I can't remember.
Right.
Do you know the name of it? Because I'm drawing a blank on what the actual audit is before you guys actually start counting any ballots.
Yeah, they're auditing the machines. It's the logic and accuracy.
That's it. Logic and accuracy. That's exactly what it is. Okay. And is that an election judge thing as well?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Like I said, every piece has to
right.
involve an election judge.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. Logic and accuracy test. That's what I was trying to think of.
Which determines that the machines are working properly.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure if it's the election judges who are actually filling out the ballots, but basically it is the election judges. So you guys are randomly filling out ballots and then running them through and then verifying that it's reading exactly how you filled them out.
Because part of that filling them out is also randomly making sure you did something wrong.
Right. So you'll actually induce errors on it to make sure it catches.
Yes. To make sure it catches them and puts it in adjudication.
And every machine is tested. We run through the series all around the room with the test decks.
Awesome. Well, ladies, unless you have anything to add, I don't have anything else to ask you. I really appreciate y'all. It's very educational. A lot of times when I go into these things, I don't know the answers to the questions, so I'm legitimately learning myself, and I I really appreciate y'all taking the time to do this. It's extremely important. And the big thing to get across is it's a rewarding thing, and you do get paid for it, and they need more, and the election's right around the corner. So
Yes.
yeah, thank you all so much for doing this, and good luck with the election. Like I said, it's probably going to be the most busiest election that we've ever had. So we'll say a prayer for y'all.
Oh, we need all of those.
Okay. Thank you all. Talk
All
to you
right.
soon.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.